Hey there, Fletch from All Things Overlanding here. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about packing for overlanding trips. And specifically what I'm going to be talking about is kind of the fun of it, why I think that actually kind of prepping for an overlanding trip, planning your route, planning your destination that you want to go to, figuring out what gear you need to bring and that sort of thing can sort of be almost as fun as the actual trip, and why I actually really love the build up like a week or two out from taking a trip. So today I'm going to run you through that stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit about why that's fun, why I think that's fun, why I think you should think it's fun too probably, and we'll get into that a little bit. So if you want to learn more about packing for an overlanding trip and kind of why it's a good thing and why it can be as much fun as the actual trip itself, stay tuned. Alright guys, so as I mentioned on the intro, today I'm talking a little bit about planning for an overlanding trip, packing for an overlanding trip, and sort of the fun that comes with getting ready for a longer trip. I'm going to break this up into 3 sections. So I'm going to kind of start with the prepping and sort of my list building and my checklist that I build and sort of how I do that, and again why I think that's important. Then I'm going to move into actually prepping and packing for the trip, maintenance stuff that you need to do, kind of thought around how to organize your gear and that sort of thing. And then I'm going to end up with the actual like day of prep, being ready, and kind of the joys of getting out on the road and starting your trip. So let's start with part number 1, the sort of prep and checklist piece of preparing for an overlanding trip. You know, typically this will start really soon after I decide that I'm going to go on a trip. So, you know, I find trips, and I'll put a card up here to some of the videos that I've done on how to find locations for overlanding trips. A lot of it comes from like Facebook groups, things like that. Just groups that I'm a part of, people that I've become friends with over the years that say, hey, I'm going to go here on this weekend. Do you want to go with me? Usually as soon as that happens, then I start to prepare my checklist. So I'll basically make a copy of one that I've used before, and I will put a link in the description down below to my sort of general template for a checklist for things to bring with you. Now, of course, you know, take it as a template, make a copy of it, save it as your own, and then feel free to adjust it, tweak it, make it whatever you want, but it's a good starting point. But basically mine has sort of a spot for food per day, and then it also has like categories for what type of gear it is. Is it camping gear? Is it clothes? Is it recovery gear? That kind of thing. So I will kind of put sort of a category that it falls into, so that I make sure it makes finding stuff easier. If you've got a list of 30, 40, 50 or more things that you need to make sure you bring with you on a trip, it just helps to sort of categorize it. And then I have where it's packed. So like, is it in my decked system? Is it in the bed of my truck? Is it in my back seat? You know, is it on my roof rack? Like, where's that gear going to go? And then is it packed or not? And I just put an X in that column. So again, I'll put a link in the description down to that template. But as soon as a trip starts for me, as soon as I'm planning for a trip, even months out, a lot of the time, I will go ahead and start making that list, building it out, starting to think through the gear, thinking about the possible challenges that I might see. What kind of recovery gear do I need to bring with me? All that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's super important to think about the type of trip that you're taking, the type of terrain you're going to be tackling. Are you going solo? Are you going with other people? And then build out your checklist of what exactly you want to bring with you on that trip. All right, so but once you get through your checklist, once you kind of have that all built out, you're still going to be constantly sort of monitoring that and making changes to it. I can tell you for a fact that like I had a buddy that is going on this next trip with me. We're going to Wisconsin. It's about 8 hours away. So then in that case, because of the distance, I've got to bring some fluids with me, right? I want to bring some tools just in case something happens. So that changes the trip versus like maybe one that's an hour away or 2 hours away. Because we're going so far, I need more tools. I might need some spares for parts and stuff that might commonly break on the trail. Same with fluids, that sort of thing too. And maintenance, I will do more maintenance on the vehicle just to make sure that my oil is okay, that all my fluids are topped off, that everything is functioning the way that it should before this super long trip. Because again, if something happens, it's winter climate, it's going to be cold. It could be life-threatening if you break down on the side of the road or something bad happens. So again, look at the type of trip you're taking, look at how far away it is, look at whether it's solo or with friends, look at your gear restraints. Do you have a size like limitation in your vehicle? Or are you in an SUV and you just only have so much room? I'll give you a good example. Right back here, you can see this gray blob there. That is my BioLite fire pit. This thing's amazing, it's awesome, but it's huge and it's super heavy. So like on smaller trips or trips where I have a lot of other gear that I have to take, I wouldn't probably take that fire pit just because it's so large. In this case, because we're going to snow country, because we're going to Wisconsin, we have a couple of different dispersed camps where we're all going to be sort of splitting up because there's a good number of rigs that'll be at this event. I wanted to have this nice fire pit that's lifted up off the ground, out of the snow, right, with the built-in fan so that I can get a fire going if the wood's a little bit wet. I wanted to bring that because I think that will make my trip better. So in that case, I'm sacrificing the space for a bigger fire pit for this trip. But again, I put it on my checklist, I check it off, I make sure that I've got it, and before I go out on the trip, I just go through and I check everything off and I pre-pack everything as much as I possibly can. Again, in the case of this trip, because I'm going so far away, I am taking quite a bit of time. It's about 4 days out from the trip right now, and I wanted to just get everything packed so that I don't have to worry about it the day of, right? I have to leave at 6 a.m. on Friday to meet up with my buddy on the other side of town and then drive about 8 hours north from there. So meeting at 7 and then driving another 8 hours. It's going to be a 9-10 hour day, you know, with gas stops and food stops and everything before we even get to our destination, to the area where we're going to be overlanding for the weekend. So, but again, once you get through that checklist, then we're going to move on to part 2, which is the actual packing. So like I just kind of mentioned, for a bigger trip, for a longer trip, in my opinion, it's better to get started early. Now, this could depend a lot on where you live too, right? If you live in a high crime area, you can't leave your gear in the back of your truck or exposed on the outside, then you may have to do it last minute. In my case, I live in a decent area. I've never had any problem with theft or anything like that, so I do try to pre-pack stuff as much as possible. So I've got my Rotopacks filled with diesel on there. I pre-filled it a week or two ago. I've got my diesel heater right back there, already attached to the truck. That's the BioLite fire pit. You know, those 2 rigid boxes there are my cooking gear. Then I've got my aqua brick full of water ready to go. And then that bin next to it is actually a dog food container. If you want to learn more about that, I did a video on why it makes a good, cheap dry food storage bin. That's my dry food storage. So I've got a couple cans of chili in there. I've got some Reese's cups. I've got stuff like that I'm going to take with me as snacks and food for the trip. So then a lot of this is going to depend on your setup. So if you are an SUV, obviously you may not have like a decked system like I do in the bed of my truck. If you have a camper shell, you may have more room inside here or less room. So I'm going to keep it kind of high level in general. Again, just depending on your setup, it's going to make a lot of difference. But I do like to get specific into my deck system and really try to optimize everything. So I've got all of my like sleeping stuff is in here, a heated blanket, a pillow, an extra blanket, that kind of thing. And then on the other side, I've got tools and stuff like that. So again, all my recovery gear, my tools are all kind of together in an easy to get location as well. Another little tip that I will give you is that, at least myself, I always try really hard to take advantage of spots that are not commonly used or places that, you know, maybe you don't think of for storage. So how do I get more stuff sort of in my rig without being super ostentatious or putting stuff all over it, right? I don't necessarily want to just slap stuff all over it, but if it's something that's going to be useful for a trip, I want to find a way to get it on there. So one example of that is my chainsaw mount here. I mounted this inside of my 5th spare tire on the swing out on the rear. So I can actually undo this little bolt here, and this sandwich mount opens up and you can put your chainsaw down in it. So, you know, that's just one idea to kind of utilize a space that otherwise would be wasted. So I like that quite a bit. Another sort of newer piece of gear that I just got that I really, really love because of it giving me the ability to utilize a space that, again, would not normally be usable is my OTC mod rack / spare tire mount system. You can see the shovel up here. I'll show you the outside of it here as well, but it's basically got like a little shelf for a trash bag to sit on, so kind of like a trasharoo, but then it's got sort of a molly panel backing that goes on the spare tire on your swing out and allows you to mount lots of other stuff to it in sort of a molly configuration. So I've got a shovel on there and I've got an axe on there. So again, we're going to be camping in the North Woods up in Wisconsin. Going to need a shovel probably. If anybody gets stuck, we may have to dig out. And then also going to have my axe for firewood splitting, cutting, down trees, that sort of thing. I'm also bringing my chainsaw, as I mentioned, so we'll have duplicates, redundancy, depending on what I need based on the situation. But again, I try and pack as early as possible for trips just to give myself a little bit more time to be ready and to make sure that I don't forget anything. Another tip that I will give you that I am guilty of not doing quite often is actually use your checklist. So, you know, I build that for weeks and weeks, but then sometimes you get excited right at the end and you're like, yeah, I think I got everything, I'm good. And then you get going and you get on the road and you get to your destination and you forgot your wires for your diesel heater. And then you're miserable the whole trip because you forgot it. So if you're going to go through the work of building the checklist, when you start to do your actual packing, make sure you're checking stuff off, make sure that you're running through the whole thing and confirming that you've got every piece of gear before you leave. It'll just make sure you have a better trip. All right, so then let's get into when you finally are ready to go on the trip, right? I'm in my truck right now. Again, I've got I've actually got a couple of days until I go on this trip, but I'm just sort of acting this out for you guys, right? To give you an idea. But so like morning of, right? You get super excited. You're so excited to be going on this trip. I would recommend, again, I have had so many bad experiences where I'm just stupidly forgot something because I was lazy or I got too excited and I got going too quick and I just didn't do the due diligence that I should have to make sure that I had everything for the trip. So morning of, you're super excited, right? Make sure that you take a beat, take a second to maybe recheck through your checklist or just look through your gear. Look around in your truck, make sure that you've got everything behind you, right? Do you have everything? Is the fridge plugged in? Do you have all your food, right? Just take advantage of that time before you leave because you could ruin your whole trip by forgetting something. So even though that day of is super exciting and it's one of my favorite times, right? So like planning is super awesome. Even packing is pretty awesome to get all your stuff ready. Feels good to have your truck totally kitted out, all your gear on it, ready to go. That last thing, the third part of this is making sure you have a good trip by not getting too excited and not losing sight of the goal, right? So the goal is for the journey to be good. The goal is for, that's kind of what they say about overlanding. It's not so much the destination, it's not where you're going, it's the trip, right? Forgetting stuff will be memorable, I promise you, because again, I've done it quite a few times myself. I have gone on a trip and I mean, that story of forgetting the diesel heater, like cords and hoses and stuff, is totally true. I went out there to camp with a buddy of mine in Hoosier National Forest. I got there, I was all excited. I opened up my tent. I realized I didn't have my ladder. I forgot my ladder for my rooftop tent. And I was like, you know what? No big deal. I can climb up my bed rack. I can get in there. It's not going to be ideal, but it'll work. Then I start to hook up my diesel heater and all that stuff. I had everything. I thought I had everything that I needed. And then I started to try and plug it in, and I didn't have the cord or the hose to pipe it up into the tent. I had none of that stuff, and it was going to get down in like the teens. So I ended up sleeping in a buddy's Gazelle tent because he had a diesel heater, because it was that or sleep in the truck or just, be miserable all night. So again, it is super exciting to get ready for your trip. Getting ready for that trip, the prep, all that stuff is fun. The day of is going to be the most exciting when you're ready to leave. Just make sure that you've got all your stuff. Just do that last minute check, right? Take your time a little bit before you leave and make sure that everything's ready to go. If you've done all your maintenance stuff already, you shouldn't have to worry about that. If you've packed most of your stuff and checked off your checklist, it should be a really quick 2 to 5 minute check, right? Just to make sure that everything's good. Make sure that your swing out is locked. If you have a rear bumper with a swing out, that has happened to me before where I am at a campsite. It hasn't happened to me at my house because I generally just keep it closed and locked up. But I've been at camp before where I've had my swing out open all night long, right? And I go around and I close up my bed and I think that I've got everything good, but maybe I have to put one more thing in the deck system and then I forget to close the swing out. Luckily for me, my rear view camera is actually mounted to my swing out. So if I put it in reverse and I see like the side of my truck, then I know something is wrong, right? And that to me cues me to say, oh, your swing out is not closed. But like things like that, right? Like it just gets so exciting. We all want to go on these trips and that's what we love about it. And it's great. But you want to be careful and do that last minute sort of walk around. Do a walk around on your vehicle. Make sure everything's strapped down. Make sure that everything's safe. Make sure the rooftop tent is latched. Make sure that your swing out is closed and latched, right? Make sure that all your gear is tied down. Check all your straps. Do that sort of dad thing, right? Where you snap the straps and you say that's not going anywhere, just to make sure. Because the worst thing that can happen is you're driving down the highway and something flies off your truck and it causes someone else to have an accident or something, or you lose a piece of important gear that you need for your trip, or you forget something, right? So again, that last day is awesome. Going on the trip is awesome. And I hope that you guys are getting excited listening to this episode, thinking about your next trip, thinking about how you want to, do better and not forget your stuff. Again, in the description below is a link to my checklist. Feel free to use that. Feel free to subscribe to my channel and check out all the other videos. I've done a ton of like beginner style, what to do to get ready, how to find campsites, all that kind of stuff. So if that's something you guys are looking for, I'd love to have you as a subscriber. Click that subscribe button, click the bell to be notified when new videos drop. Also in the description down below are links to all my other channels. I'm on pretty much everything. So if you want to hang out on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, I'd love to have you. Come join the conversation. Also down there are links to Patreon. We've got an awesome Patreon group. It's growing every day. And we've got a Discord where we all kind of chat about our rigs and builds. And we also do like a once a month sort of like Zoom meeting where we all get together, folks from all over the country, and we just sort of chat. talk about our builds, talk about trips coming up, things like that, questions people have. It's awesome, and I love it. So I'd love to have you in there. And then last but not least, there is a link to the Facebook group that I run called Newbie Overlanders. Again, really focused on getting newer overlanders into the hobby, right? And also avoiding a lot of that negativity that comes with those bigger groups. So if you're looking for that, we'd love to have you in that as well. Click on that link, and we will see you there. But again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you're on the podcast, I appreciate you guys. If you enjoyed the podcast, leave it a 5-star review. That helps a ton. Share it with your friends. Add it to your favorites, all that stuff. If you have questions, feel free to shoot me an email or DM me on any of those things down below. I'm always happy to help, and I respond to every single message. Or drop a comment down below if you're on YouTube. But again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Appreciate all you guys and girls, and we will see you and talk to you next week.